Quote of the day: love is the quiet sunrise that colors your heart before the world even notices. Hold it gently and it will light even the darkest corners. My command is love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. John chapter 15 verse 12 through 13. That is your quote of the day. Now let's get right into this video. Now SmackDown this week, honestly, it was kind of just meh. I finished watching the show and there was no key takeaways from it. Nothing too memorable happened. Nothing too special, unique, important. Nothing. I finished watching the show and I was like, well, that was that. That was this week, I guess. I don't even know what to say about it, what to comment on. This week was just meh. Right smack dab in the middle of the road, meh. Like SmackDown, Raw, it doesn't matter what show it is. As of late, nothing makes sense on them. Nothing matters. Nothing happens, It's just meh. You just watch it to watch it at this point, and that's what this episode felt like. We had like two good matches, I think. Am I giving too much credit? We had one good match, I think, and everything else besides that didn't really matter. The promos, the segments, the backstage segments, nothing else really mattered on the show besides like the Sami Zayn Open Challenge, and that was like probably my favorite match of the night, and that was probably the only important thing or the only thing of meaning that happened. Other than that, everything else just it didn't matter. It really didn't. But anyhow, though, let's just get right into this review. Let's talk about what actually happened on this week's episode of SmackDown. So we kicked off with a Brock Lesnar, I guess, segment. I can't even call it a promo or anything. It was just a Brock Lesnar segment, We kicked off with Brock Lesnar absolutely manhandling Michael Cole and Corey Graves, He was tossing the boys around like a sack of potatoes, and it was the funniest thing. And Corey Graves actually ended up eating 2 F5s. He ate the first F5 and it looked so mean. He was trying to be a hero, trying to save Michael Cole and everything. And he ended up eating an F5. And then Brock Lesnar looks dead into the camera and he tells John Cena, John Cena's not there obviously because 2 weeks ago was his last SmackDown and whatever. So I'm still confused why big, smart, genius, intelligent Brock Lesnar showing up on SmackDown knowing that John Cena's no longer on SmackDown, looking for John Cena on SmackDown. Make it make sense, But anyhow, after Brock Lesnar F5's Corey Graves for the first time round, he looks dead into the camera and he tells John Cena, John, I'm coming for you. Tomorrow is D-Day and I'm coming for blood, John, so I'm coming for you. And that's basically what he tells John Cena, through the camera, that tomorrow at WrestlePalooza, it's D-Day, and he's coming for blood, and John Cena better look out, better watch out, And then Brock Lesnar went on to F5 Corey Graves again right after he tells this to the camera, to John Cena. And Corey Graves ended up eating 2 F5s, like I said, And now let me be completely honest with you and completely transparent. I can't find a single reason why or how these chain of events correlated to John Cena in any way, shape, and or form. You're looking for John Cena, but you go on SmackDown to show that he's not on anymore to look for him, right? Whatever. Then you proceed to bully Michael Cole and F5 Corey Graves to do what? How does this relate to John Cena in any way, shape, or form? John Cena, did he want John Cena to come out to save Corey Graves and Michael Cole or something? Like, what was the point of this segment? What was the point of this, Like, none of these events, none of the actions that Brock Lesnar did tonight related to John Cena in any way, shape, or form. Like, the chain of events we saw, I'm like, how does this wrap around to the story? How does this relate to the story? There isn't even a story, honestly, so I guess it perfectly wraps around to a story that's not there, But, like, I'm like, how does this relating to John Cena in any way, shape, or form? Like, WWE literally don't know what they want to do with this nonsense. It's just a match just to happen, I'm like, Jesus Christ. And I guess this segment, this, Brock Lesnar thing made sense in WWE's head, come out, attack Corey Graves and Michael Cole and say something to John Cena. I guess that made sense in the mind of Triple H and the writers backstage, but like, man, a kindergartner could have wrote something better than this. Jesus Christ. But anyway, for the rest of the show, due to Corey Graves eating 2 F5s, he was off for the rest of the show, and The Miz actually ended up filming from in the announcers team, So it was Miz and Michael Cole for this show, and The Miz was pretty entertaining in my opinion, I enjoyed it. Anyhow, after this, we got to our first match of the night, and it was Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss, aka Charlexa, versus the Secret Service, Chelsea Green and Alba Fire, for the Tag Team Championships, And this match wasn't terrible by any means whatsoever, It was certainly not must-see either, but it was definitely not terrible, It was an alright match. The crowd really made this match feel special because, the crowd was behind them and the crowd was really lively and, they were into it. So it made this match feel special even though this match wasn't, So I kind of appreciated that from the crowd. But besides that, though, this match was just alright, smack dab right in the middle, alright, But anyways, we got the standard spots, from both teams, from both Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair and the Secret Service. We got the standard spots, what they normally do. Nothing special, nothing unique. This was just a standard match. And at the end, Charlotte Flair ended up actually hitting a natural selection on Chelsea Green and pinned Chelsea Green for the win. Which I was like, you have Alba Fire in the match, but instead of Charlotte pinning Alba Fire, you have her pin Chelsea Green instead. I mean, like, questionable decision, but whatever, I'm not the one booking the show, obviously. So we're just going to move on. Anyhow, after this, we got a backstage segment between the Street Profits, and the Street Profits still aren't getting along. They're still at each other's necks, they're still at odds. They're still trying to figure out, I guess what the issue is. Should they stick together? Should they break up and stuff like that? And Bo Dallas comes out of nowhere and he tries to drag a wedge between the Street Profits even more, And, Montez Ford ended up pressing Bo Dallas. He grabbed him by the collar, started wrinkling his shirt, talking about some, what's your end goal here? What are you trying to do here? Basically trying to figure out what Bo Dallas is trying to do. And in the process of doing that, big, scary Eric Rowan ends up coming out of nowhere, and he leaves the Street Profits, both Angelo Dawkins and Montez Ford, completely laid out. And that was the backstage segment. After this, we got another backstage segment, and WWE basically just shamelessly did a backstage ESPN sponsor plug, and it was like, man, this was not needed. And they did, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 6 of these throughout the show, and I'm like, Jesus Christ. The first 2 was, I guess, all right, the first 2 was pushing it, and you do 4 more after that, and the main reasoning behind this was for them to try to explain to the fans how to watch WrestlePalooza on ESPN, and they did the same segment 6 different times. 6 or 7 different times. I'm like, come on. Jesus Christ, such a waste of time. But the first segment we saw, it was with R-Truth, and R-Truth was basically backstage. And he was trying to teach people how to use the ESPN Plus app, how to watch WrestlePalooza on the ESPN Plus app. And after that, we got to see this Instagram, I guess, video post of Cody Rhodes talking about it, how to access WrestlePalooza on the ESPN Plus app and stuff like that. And then, like I said, we went on to see this 4 more times. We got 1 more R-Truth, 2 Cody Rhodeses, and someone else. And like I said, 6 or 7 other times we saw the same nonsense of WWE being like, oh, get the ESPN Plus app so you could watch WrestlePalooza. Here's how you can do it. Do you have a cable company? Do you have Hulu? Do you have this? And I'm like, come on. The first 2 were, pushing it, like I said, and you do this 4 or 5 more times. Come on. That was so unwarranted and so unneeded. Jesus Christ. But anyhow, after this, we got a Paul Heyman and the Braun Brawns segment. The Braun Brawns basically ended up coming out and they snuck attacked and blindsided Faxium, And I don't know what the segment was supposed to be in the first place, if Faxium was actually supposed to face another team or something, but whatever. They were just out in the ring and they got blindsided by the Braun Brawns. And Paul Heyman went on to cut a promo basically saying that the Braun Brawns will absolutely destroy the Usos tomorrow night at WrestlePalooza. And I'm like, you're telling me Paul Heyman makes his return, no announcement, no nothing. And the first thing he says is that the Braun Brawns are going to absolutely destroy the Usos. He doesn't bring up how he was in the hospital for X amount of time, how, Roman Reigns injured him, he was put in the guillotine, how he's not feeling the best, how he's not in the best of shape, he's still injured, he's still recovering. He doesn't bring that up at all. That doesn't matter. He's talking about the Braun Brawns are going to beat Jey Uso and Jimmy Uso in a pointless match for nothing, for no stakes, no reasoning. I'm like, what? Okay, Paul Heyman, forget your safety and your health then, that doesn't matter. A real trooper there, real trooper here. But anyhow, after this, after Paul Heyman says all this, Fax Team end up coming back. They were stunned for a little bit. If you ever played WWE 2K, they were stunned. They were dazed. They were on the floor dazed and they were stunned. And their stun meter finally wore down, and they finally were able to get back up and throw some hits in there. And they got their licks back on the Braun Brawns, and this led to a match. And it was our second match of the night, and it was Faxium versus the Braun Brawns. And I was thinking to myself while this was happening, I'm like, man, we can't even escape from the Braun Brawns on SmackDown. Really? I'm watching SmackDown so I don't have to see Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed. And you're telling me they're on my SmackDown show too on top of that? Jesus Christ, we just can't escape the vision. Jesus. But anyhow, at least this was, a new matchup, a new lineup, so I wasn't too mad at it or anything. But throughout this match, the Braun Brawns basically just dominated Faxium, and they defeated Faxium with relatively to no, difficulty, with relative ease, honestly. It wasn't much competition, much stalemate or anything. They just ran through Faxium, quite honestly, like I said, with relative ease. They basically dominated and defeated Faxium. Faxium did, however, do their thing in the ring. They still look good for however long that match was. They did their thing. They tried to, at least, so I'll give them credit for that. But besides that, though, that was the match. Faxium basically got dominated by the Braun Brawns, and the Braun Brawns ended up picking up the win, and that was basically that was the match. And that's basically all I could say for it. It didn't matter. It was for no reason, no stakes, no nothing. Whatever, whatever. Anyhow, after this, we got an in-ring promo from Nia Jax. And, whew, man, Jesus. This was something, alright. This was something. This was something. Jesus Christ. I don't even know what to say about this. But Nia Jax basically comes down and she says, "Do you know what I'm sick of? It's this women's division. It's embarrassing. I'm the alpha woman of this division." And then she went on to do the most insufferably funny, unfunny imitation of Tiffany Stratton. She's like, "Oh, you have Tiffy time, Tiffy time, Tiffy time, Tiffy time, Tiffy time, Tiffy time," running around saying that she's the face of the women's division. And while she was doing this whole Tiffy time thing, she was jumping around like a headless chicken. Dude, I don't know what this was supposed to be, but all I know is that I did not enjoy any of it. Any of it. And I refuse to watch this on my screen ever again. I don't want to see this happening on my TV ever again. Jesus Christ. But anyhow, like I said, she did this terrible impression of Tiffany Stratton, saying that Tiffany Stratton thinks she's like the face of the women's division. I'm like, she basically is. She's holding the championship. I don't know what you're trying to say at this point, what you're debating. She's holding the championship. She is the face of SmackDown's women's division at this moment, at this point in time, you know? So I was like, whatever. But anyhow, Nia Jax went on to drop an actual bar in this, promo segment. She went on to say that Jade Cargill looks good until she actually gets into the ring. And I was like, that's kind of true, honestly, and it was kind of funny in my opinion. She's like, Jade Cargill too. She's out here, she looks good until she gets in the ring. And I was like, you know what? I'll give you that, Nia. I'll give you that. But anyhow, after this, Tiffy time! Tiffany Stratton ended up coming out, and she basically said nothing on the mic, and she repeated her same old script, so like nothing of importance was said. And after this, Jade Cargill ended up storming out to the arena, storming out to the ring, and Jade Cargill and Tiffany Stratton tried to storm into the ring to get their leg back on Nia Jax for what Nia Jax did last week. But they were unsuccessful because security guards stopped them dead in their tracks, and they were separating these three. And then we got Nick Aldis coming out with a huge announcement saying that next week we're going to get a triple threat match between Nia Jax, Tiffany Stratton, and Jade Cargill for the Women's Championship. So that's that. Anyhow, after this, we got our third match of the night, and it was Carmelo Hayes, Mr. Him, versus Sami Zayn in a U.S. Open Challenge match. And this was my favorite match of the night and the most entertaining match of the night, in my opinion. This was match of the night and the only watchable thing that was on the show. This match, like I said, was actually really good. I really enjoyed this, and like I said, this was match of the night for me. Both Carmelo Hayes and Sami Zayn were entertaining, and as always, Carmelo Hayes was very entertaining in the ring with his high-flying moves, and Sami Zayn held his own too, These two were just amazing in the ring, and it was such a fun match. But at the end of the match, Sami Zayn actually ended up hitting a Blue Thunder Bomb for the win, so not even the Haluva kick, which I found that pretty odd, but whatever. He ended up hitting a Blue Thunder Bomb for the win on Carmelo Hayes. But like I said, this was a really good match. This was really fun. The in-ring action, the in-ring work rate, both of these men, they did their thing, and they showed out, This was a really fun match. I enjoyed this from start to finish, and Miz on commentary made this even better. He was rooting for Carmelo Hayes, and it was just funny. But anyhow, after this, we got a little video package segment. It was part 2 of the John Cena and Brock Lesnar thing. So it was part 2 of the history between John Cena and Brock Lesnar, their whole feud, their whole rivalry, where they came from, how they became the stars that they are today. So that was that. We got another video package, and it was part 2. And that was that. It was still pretty neat. We got more information about the feud and the people, Brock Lesnar and John Cena in general, more information about the superstars, which was pretty neat. Anyhow, after this, we finally made it to our main event. And the main event was Drew McIntyre and the American Nightmare, Cody Rhodes, contract signing, So they're signing a contract for the WrestlePalooza match. So I don't know why this is the only match that needed a contract signing when there's multiple matches on the match card. Why is this the one that needs a contract signing? Like, the contract signings never really make sense to me. I guess, I don't even know. I guess since it's a championship match, whatever. But, it feels like the contract signings are just, for convenience sake and for just a cheap brawl, So Cody Rhodes ended up coming out, and he reminded Drew McIntyre for whatever reason. I don't know why this was relevant, but he reminded Drew McIntyre that 15 years ago today, we were actually tag team champions, So I don't know if you remember that. Nobody else probably remembers that, and that's what Cody Rhodes said. And I'm like, what was the point of bringing it up then if you said, it doesn't matter, nobody else probably remembers it? Why did you even bring it up? What was the point of having it in this promo segment? But whatever, So Cody Rhodes tells Drew McIntyre that 15 years ago, we were actually tag team champions together, you and I. And then he went on to glaze Drew McIntyre, And then he called Drew McIntyre a keyboard warrior, and he's telling Drew McIntyre, for the first time, I'm letting you talk, If you have something to say it to my face, or, better yet, pull out your phone and tweet about it since you're such a keyboard warrior. And this promo literally fell short, basically. There was no animosity behind it. There was no intensity. It didn't add anything to this rivalry, to this feud. It was just there just to be there. Cody Rhodes didn't say anything impactful, anything, too major, anything that would make you go, what? No, wait. Anything to get a reaction out of the fans? Nothing. This was just a stale promo segment by Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre. Because after this, Drew McIntyre got on the mic and he literally said nothing as well. Like, he said a whole lot of nothing. So Drew McIntyre basically just called Cody Rhodes a corporate stooge, basically saying that he injured Cody Rhodes a few weeks ago. Cody Rhodes was out for a full 5 weeks, and now Cody Rhodes returns, and instead of stomping Drew McIntyre's head in, Cody Rhodes is out here talking Drew McIntyre's ears off. And that's basically what Drew McIntyre is saying. He's like, instead of stomping my head in, you're over here talking my ears off. Like, what are you doing? You're a corporate stooge, You're more concerned about your image than, actually facing me. You're more concerned about keeping your image and keeping your main event title spot instead of facing me and actually getting your get back, getting your lick back. And that's basically what he's telling Cody Rhodes. And that was basically that. And that was basically the whole promo. And then this led to them both signing the contract, and a huge brawl broke out, And Drew McIntyre was about to Claymore kick Cody Rhodes' head through the announcer's table again, but then he decided against it. Then Cody Rhodes got back in the ring and did a suicide dive onto Drew McIntyre, and they brawled again for a little bit. Then Drew McIntyre ended up getting the upper hand, and he stood tall. And that was that. That was your whole segment, And that was your whole show of SmackDown. 3 matches, only one of them was good. And besides that, everything else was just pointless, meaningless, nonsense. Nothing made sense. Nothing mattered. That was your whole show, Overall, I'd rate this week's episode of SmackDown a solid 4 out of 10, A solid 4 out of 10, no higher. It could be lower, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm trying to be generous, a 4 out of 10. But this episode was really nothing special. Like I said, on this episode and many of the other WWE shows we've been getting as of late, nothing made sense, nothing mattered, You just finish, you watch the show and you're just done with it. It's finished and you're just like, meh. What even happened? You don't even know what to talk about, what to say about, because you saw it, but literally nothing of substance happened. Nothing was advanced. Nothing new happened. We didn't see anything new, anything different. It was just meh. Like I said, there was no key takeaways, no memorable moments, no important moments, no nothing. It was just a show just to be a show. And to make matters worse, this was the go home show before the PLE. Man, what are we doing at this point? But anyhow, that's my review and my breakdown of this week's episode of SmackDown. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for hearing me out. And thank you for being here. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to. Like, comment, and subscribe if you'd like to. And like, comment, and subscribe if you choose to. As always, it's been a pleasure. I'm out.